Hey, what's going on? It's Dr. Mike T. Nelson here, back with another podcast on the Flex Diet podcast. And today it's just me talking about a huge tip for goal setting and how to view it in the new year, 2021. So hopefully you had a wonderful holidays and you're headed into 2021 in the right direction. And today's podcast is sponsored by me. You can go to my website, which is miketnelson.com. And very soon, depending on when you're listening to this, hopefully when you're listening to this later, I will have a brand new website up for you. So pretty excited about that. We're putting a lot more content there. And a lot of the content that I write goes out to my newsletter. And much of that only goes out to the newsletter. So you can get on the newsletter for free. Go to miketnelson.com and go up to the top. You'll see a free gift that you can get. And there'll be multiple ways there to get onto the newsletter. Like I said, it's free. I send out content pretty much daily, 6 days a week. And go to miketnelson.com, hop on the newsletter, and send me a note from there. I would like to hear from you. So today we're talking about goal setting, which has been kind of beat to death, but looking at it in a little bit of a different way and giving you some practical tips that you can use if you're setting up your own training, or if you're a trainer or a coach. This is kind of the method that I use with clients also that I found to be super effective. So the first thing is goals. I got this from Dr. Brian Grasso. I like using intentions a little bit better. I do think having a rough timeline on things is helpful. And if you're competing, you're going to have a set date, so that's going to be kind of done for you. So I think timelines are good. I like intention better with a rough time frame on it, so that way you don't kill yourself as you get closer to your goal. So what I've seen is have people set a very strict time frame of, let's say, 3 months. In the last couple of weeks before they hit that 3-month marker, they try to bury themselves to reach it, even though in that case they don't have an external competition per se. They could move the date. Now that ends up being a little bit, as I hate the analogy of the slippery slope. We do want to have some sort of time frame on it, but the time frame is just more open-ended. So the difference between a goal or an intention has more of a rough time frame associated with it, and they tend to be longer in duration. I know I've gotten better at my own goals, looking at them as what are kind of the big high points I want to hit, thinking of that in terms of months, years, and in some cases, decades, right? So I want to pick up the Thomas Inch dumbbell. So it's a 172-ish pound dumbbell with a handle about the size of a pop can, and it's a solid cast one piece. So when you try to pick it up, the weight for a one-hand deadlift isn't really that heavy. Most people can do that with straps relatively easy. But it's the fact that it wants to spin out of your hand that makes it very, very challenging from a grip aspect. So that one I've been working on for about 4 years so far. And my goal is to do that ideally by the time I'm 50. Now, if that's 49 or 51, that's going to be fine. But I'm thinking about a rough time frame. And the main goals I have are actually measured more in decades. And that's probably going to be true for you. If you're doing something that less people in the world have done, odds are it's going to take you many years to get there. And that's just a guidepost so that you stay focused on the process. So my next step here is to figure out what is the gap. So looking at your current training, looking at your goals that you want to achieve or your intentions, what are you missing? What do you need to do to make sure that those line up? And I like looking at the SAID principle first. So SAID principle, which I originally got this from Dr. Eric Hobb at Z-Health, specific adaptation to imposed demand, a SAID principle. If I want to get better at, let's say, front squats, the fastest way to get better at front squats is to front squat, right? I know Dan John has talked a lot about this, which is great. So the specific thing you want to do, can you practice that particular thing? Now, something like a front squat, you can change the weight on it relatively easy. That's the advantage of kind of barbell type goals, is it's very easy to change the weight on there and to change variables. For my example of the inch dumbbell, it's a little bit trickier because the implement itself is going to be fixed. So I have the option now of getting smaller versions of the implement, which I have now, which is great, or doing a modified form of the lift, just getting any progress where I can. Which brings us into the second one, which is positive transfer. It's doing something else that transfers to your goal. So if we stay with our front squat analogy, maybe doing a different type of squat transfers. So if I'm trying to get better at a barbell front squat with a clean grip, maybe doing a Zercher squat where I'm holding the barbell in the crooks of my elbows will transfer to doing a front squat or a double kettlebell front squat, or heck, maybe even an RDL, right? Something that doesn't necessarily look like a front squat, can that transfer, i.e. bring up my front squat? Because at some point when you get down to programming things, there's only so often you can probably do the specific thing that you're trying to get better at. Which brings me into the second part, which is to make sure that you're measuring some type of cost. Of course, we want to measure progress. You want to measure what you are doing. You want to measure to see if you're getting closer to your goal. But a lot of people forget about what is the cost that they're willing to pay for that. So now that cost could be sort of, quote, time in recovery. It could be just general movement quality. Could be pain. It could be a lot of different things. So in my case, I just don't really like any joint pain or being in pain really at all. So when I look at achieving my goals on a 1 to 10 scale of joint pain, my max is really about a 1 ongoing. So can I do that without putting myself in pain? And some people might be different. You know, if you're a professional athlete, then you may tolerate a fair amount of pain because that is your living and is a very high priority. I would make the argument if you're not, having a lower pain scale is probably going to be to your benefit long term and reduce your risk of injury and everything else. You could also look at how do you feel after performing those lifts. Do you feel better? Do you feel worse? You get fancy and do a range of motion measurement if you want, like a biofeedback type approach. I like using heart rate variability. So the next day, each morning, I do a measurement of heart rate variability, which tells me the status of my autonomic nervous system. Am I more on the parasympathetic, rest and digest side, or am I more on the sympathetic side, where it's more of a stress output? I do that with all my M3 one-on-one online clients, because especially online, I want to see everything that's going on. What is the cost of that? Now, the benefit of HRV is it's a very accurate way to determine the status of your autonomic nervous system. The downside is, where it takes a little bit more coaching skill, is to then use context to figure out what is kind of the main stressor there. Maybe training, maybe sleep, maybe nutrition, maybe emotional things. All of those can change your heart rate variability. But either way, you've got at least one marker of the autonomic nervous system that's telling you the direction. So for example, if I'm training and I'm increasing more frequency, I'm doing more and more front squatting, because that is a SAID principle, right? If I want to get better at front squats, doing them is going to be the fastest route there. But my HRV keeps tanking, getting lower and lower, i.e. more and more sympathetic on the stress side. At some point, I might want to reevaluate what I'm doing. Or if I start getting really bad joint pain. Or I just feel like dog crap all the time because my training volume is so high. Right? So paying attention to the cost and thinking about that ahead of time as to how high and how far do you want to go in that realm, I find is super beneficial. So we've got our goals or intentions. We've got what is the gap from the thing you want to do. And we've got our cost. So what is the things such as joint pain, maybe looking at heart rate variability, even just time in the gym. Like how much time do you have to actually train? I'm lucky that I can train in my garage gym. Not everybody has that. So you have to take into account travel time and time away, and maybe your time is also more fixed. So what is the cost associated with those? So if I go back to my front squat analogy, one of the reasons I use that is when I was looking over my goals, I found that because of travel and everything in the past, I didn't really do that much squatting. And especially historically, I had a lot of hip pain, a lot of stuff going on. The good part is that's been all sorted out for a while now, which is great. And when I started doing squats, I found back squats just tend to beat me up pretty bad. I don't know if it's the shoulder rotation or what it is, but doing safety squat bar, I have one of the Elite FTS ones, and there's other manufacturers of it, didn't beat me up nearly as bad. And that was great. So I started doing that more. And when I also realized when I tested front squats, doing it with a clean grip with my hands or fingers on the bar was much more challenging. And I realized that my hands, because of doing a fair amount of grip stuff and being in front of a computer, being in that kind of open position, having your fingers back, your elbows out in front, was not a position that I had done a whole lot. And when I started doing more front squatting, just ever so slowly, making sure I take time to get into that position, not tending to cause any injuries or blow any tendons or anything like that, my forearms and hands started feeling better. I'm like, oh, cool. So maybe doing, in my case, front squats is a better version. And I still work in some safety squat, and I just got a rackable camber bar too. So I stay with the front squat analogy. Doing more front squats, if that's the thing I want to get better at, is going to be the fastest way to get there. And then looking at that, I like using the 3 Bs. Basic, boring is usually best. All right, so if you're stuck and you're not really sure when you're looking at your gap, think about things that you can overload to a higher degree. You can do more volume of, right? So for grip stuff, a axle deadlift is probably going to be a little bit higher return than doing some crazy tiny little pinch thing that I can only add 20 pounds to, right? The thing that I can put more volume and overload on is probably going to get me to my goals better. So if you're trying to add lean body mass, maybe body composition better, right? The old classic stuff like you've seen all the time, deadlift, bench press, overhead press. If you can do some walking movement, such as farmer's walks, that's great. Squatting, rowing, you get the idea, right? The exercises you can add more load to. The caveat with that is this does not mean you should never do any unilateral stuff. That can still be beneficial. Just make sure that your movement still feels good. All right, so if you've got a lot of movement issues, you may find that heavier bilateral compound lifts may not necessarily be your friend, but you can then try to modify them. You could go to maybe a split stance. You could go to a Jefferson deadlift or like a straddle deadlift, right? So try to modify them to a little bit of an asymmetric position. I usually find that works pretty good. So sticking with our basic boring is best, I decided that I'll do front squats as much as I can. So on my 4 lifting days, 3, sometimes 4 of those days, I'll start off by just doing front squats. Now, again, I wanted to get as much practice as I can, and I just decided, it's pretty arbitrarily, that before I do any heavier work, like in the 5 rep range, I'm going to try to get at least 50 reps in of some light load. This also serves as a more extended warm-up. This gives my hands a little bit more of that open position, so I can get into a better position with the elbows up. And what I found by doing more front squats was I didn't really get beat up as much. In the past, my low back would get super tight. And I think with a front squat, because you kind of have to stay more up and down, if you're using a clean grip, if you can get away doing that, it just removes some compensations. You can't really bend too far forward or you're going to miss the lift. So that was kind of the other reason that I did it, is historically I found it doesn't beat me up as much. So I did my little experiment. So I started this December 10th. And at that time, if I'm honest, like hitting 10 reps with even 95 pounds was not very good. I kept falling out of position. And then I worked up to 115 by 6 reps, and then I got a follow-up set at 5. So, not the greatest, but again, the key is trying to not dismiss your current results, no matter what they are. So wherever you're at is where you're at. So that's where I was at with front squats. And if I fast forward to not quite 4 weeks, maybe 3.5 weeks. So let's see, when's the last time I did? I'm looking up my notes here. Thursday. Yeah, so Thursday for reps of 10, I did 125. And then the same session worked up to 5 good reps at 165. So definitely an improvement over time. Some of that is probably regaining some of the progress I've made in the past, although I haven't really focused a lot on front squats per se in the past. And I felt pretty good. My legs have been sore in the right places, and I definitely feel like I'm making progress. So there's just an example of a way to drop something in. I had the luxury of programming out the amount of time I could train. So some of my longer sessions were an hour and a half, sometimes 2 hours. And then in order to accommodate that, looking at cost, I found that I do much better by consolidating training days. So I found I'm doing better now by having Monday and Tuesday be kind of the heavier, longer sessions. Wednesday is just cardio only, kind of recovery. Thursday is maybe an intermediate type potentially doing more voluntary movements that I just like doing. Friday was an off day, and then Saturday was a little bit heavier, more intense day. So I really only had like 3 heavier, longer days set up, and I allowed myself a little bit more recovery between them. So on Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday, I wouldn't do any lifting, just do some light cardio, do some walking, do some meditation. So again, that's looking at what is the cost associated to doing that. So that's today's podcast. Hopefully you enjoyed that and it's a little bit helpful. So when you're looking at your goals or intentions, spend some time, figure out exactly what they are. For blocks of time, I try and only limit them to 2 to 3, right? If you're trying to do 15 things all at once, you're definitely going to fail. And analyze what is the gap. Where do you want to go? What are you missing in order to get there? Think about the SAID principle, right? So specific adaptation to imposed demand. How can you work on that thing as specifically as possible? When you're looking at exercise selection, things that you can emphasize more volume and just load heavier naturally are going to be better, right? You can load a deadlift more than you can a preacher curl, right? So depending on your goals, right, the volume is going to be one of the big drivers. So basic and boring is usually best. And make sure you pay attention to the cost, whether this be time, joint pain, recovery, heart rate variability. That'll enable you to make sure you're going in the right direction and it's not having huge amounts of unintended side effects. I find a lot of people get really hyper motivated for about 2 weeks and then they kind of implode themselves and their joints are a mess and they feel horrible and then they don't do much for the next couple of weeks, and then they're back at it again. So one of the things I do a lot with clients is I spend a fair amount of time holding them back to make sure we do this kind of slow, boring, steady progression, wave up a little bit to higher volume intensity, back down, and then back up again over time. So thank you very much. Greatly appreciate it. If you want to get on the newsletter for free, as most of my content, go to miketnelson.com. There'll be a way there to sign up to the newsletter for free. Thank you so much for listening. Greatly appreciate it. Super excited to bring you a lot more podcasts coming up this year. Again, we'll continue with having at least one per week. I've got one coming up this month with my buddy Brent talking all about fish oil. We've got Kasim from N1 Education coming up, and my good friend Ashley talking about how to eat all parts of the cow. So stay tuned for those coming out this month. Thank you so much.